Hey, back today with a new installation for you. We're going to do the front bumper on the 392.
Yeah, so we got a Go Rhino front stubby. What I like about this one is you actually have room and some options. You can do a 20-inch light bar in here, or you can do 4 pods. Since I'm losing the factory fog lights, I'm going to put 4 pods in here. 2 of them are going to be the rigid SAE fog lights. Then I'm going to put a couple floodlights in for the other 2 spots.
Let's start taking it apart.
Yeah, so first up, we got to take the bumper off. So we'll get right to that.
Do it. All right, so our fun time begins with removing the skid plate. 13mm socket, and you got 2 bolts on the edges, and then a few going along the front, holding it to the front bumper. When you do this, keep your mouth closed, otherwise you're going to get a mouthful of whatever's in here.
So we do have this little trim piece here that we don't need. It's just a couple plastic plugs that hold it in. Okay, so before removing the bumper, you have to disconnect the fog lights. So you want to pull this assembly out of the bracket that's holding it. Pull this yellow tab out. And then this just slides out of it, like that. Then pops out. The bumper is held on by 8 bolts. Felix, you want to show where those are?
So you have 2 on each side. There's 2 here and 2 on this, just on the other side.
You can't see it in the frame, but it's right on the other side of that bracket, and the same thing on the driver's side.
Yep, so what we're going to do is we're going to use an 18mm deep socket to remove these 4 on each side, and then the front bumper will just slide off.
The bolts on the inner part of the bumper, on the inner part of that bracket, are harder to get to, so probably have to get in there with a socket wrench. So with the bolts off, we should be able to just slide the bumper right off.
Grab it by the hook.
So the last thing we're going to do with the OEM bumper before we're done with it is I want to reuse this harness for the fog lights just to make installation easier. So we're just going to come over here and cut off the last part of it. It's just 3 wires, just instead of splicing the new fog lights into the one over there, because we'd have to cut that one off. We're just going to take this one and use it. So before we attach the bumper, we want to put the lights in. Just it'll be easier here than when it's on the Jeep. So we have 4 pod lights. We have 2 fog lights, which are going to go on the outside, right over here. And then we have 2 of these diffused floodlights that are going to go into the middle mounts.
So something interesting we came across that you should keep an eye out as well. The mounting brackets were, the way that they go in here, made the lights sit too high, where it was kind of being blocked by the top portion. So we figured out that we can flip them and go the other way in, and then the height would be perfect. So in case you run into something similar, always make sure to double check your brackets if they're multi-purpose, and you can just rotate it some way to get a different height.
Yeah, we were just talking, we're not sure if that's by design that you can go either way, or if, you know, it just works.
Yep, but...
So we'll go in here, we'll mount the 4 lights, then we'll handle all of the wiring, so that when we put it on, just goes right in.
Let's do it.
So the rigid lights come with this harness, which we don't really need the whole thing. We're going to connect there. It does have a fuse built in and everything. If you want to use their switch, it has everything you need for that. But since we're connecting to the OEM harness, the OEM wiring, we already have a fuse that we're going to be using. So we're just going to attach the fog lights first. And if you take a look, we know that we are going to be connecting to the factory wiring right around over here. So we just want to make sure that we have enough space on both sides, and then we're going to cut the wires and we're going to splice them into the factory connector. So this one, we barely need anything here. In fact, I'm going to end up cutting it right over here. And we don't really need much more over here. So basically, just to have the same amount of slack, right there is a good place for me to cut. And we're ready to connect them to the factory ones. So each side has neutral, so both black wires from the fog lights are going to connect to this one. The factory harness does use a separate hot for each side, so we're just going to do the same here. We're going to connect them separately. With the lights in, the last thing that needs to be prepped before we can put the bumper on, we took the trim, got it powder coated to match the rest of the Jeep. Just going to go put it right back on here, and it should be ready to go. Everything is well connected. We're just going to put some electrical tape on it for extra protection. And that's our harness. Since we have our harness ready for the fog lights, the next part is the off-road lights. So the fog lights, they very similar harness, but this one we're going to be wiring to the auxiliary switch in the Jeep. So you have to feed this from the engine compartment down to the bumper. So there is a cavity right over here that you should be able to go all the way down and come out the fender well over here. Then that goes straight out here.
I'm just gonna tape these together to kind of make it nice and simple. And when you look down here, you'll see the cavities shoot straight through. You can just drop it down and let gravity do its work, or use like a coat hanger or something to feed it if you want to. So we are going down through that hole.
So we have it coming out. It'll pop out right there, right at the front of the wheel well. I'd like to get it around here so that it's not in the wheel well itself, and then it'll follow this, which is the fog light harness. So we have our auxiliary wires under the hood. You'll find them between the battery and the fender. There's some electrical tape holding them down if this is your first time going for them. Where you pull them out, just taking this wrap off for a bit, just enough so I can strip one of the wires. So they are color coded. You'll see that there are two thicker ones. The peach and kind of tan, beige, and pink one is your auxiliary 1. This is your auxiliary 2. You'll see that those two are thicker. Those are going to give you 40 amps. These two are going to give you 15 amps. Now, for the lights that I'm connecting right now, I don't need 40 amps, but very soon I'm going to be adding more off-road lights that I'd like to add to the same switch. So I'm actually going to use auxiliary 1 for it, even though for just these it's kind of overkill. And that's ready. So we're not going to connect anything yet because I'm going to be cutting this wire that's going to be coming there, and I just don't want to leave too much slack. So we'll come back to this after the bumper is installed. We're ready to install the bumper. Felix is going to bring it over. I'm going to throw some bolts into it. So one thing to note, if you are replacing the stock plastic bumper, your holes in the frame are actually going to be a little bit smaller. You're going to need to expand them. I believe that the plastic one's held by 3/8 inch holes, and these are 1/2 inch. So you will have to drill those out a little bit. We didn't have to do that because I had the stock OEM metal bumper. We're just here to do some wire management. Okay, so we have these wires that are coming in for the off-road floodlights. Now, plug them in here. And then this harness attaches where we took it on this side. So, okay, snaps right in. All right, so here, here's our wire coming from the off-road lights. We're gonna connect to the auxiliary, so I'm just gonna cut it right there. So I'm gonna do something that you shouldn't do. I'm not gonna solder it. Just gonna splice it together, only because as soon as, just in a few days here, I'm gonna be adding some more off-road lights that I wanna use on the same connection, so not gonna have it out much between now and then. Just doing a very temporary splice just to make sure everything works, because I'll finalize this in a couple days, and I'm actually thinking of putting an aftermarket switch panel, which actually should be arriving today. We'll put our ground right over here. All right, so we're gonna power up the Jeep. We're gonna make sure that all of the lights work. Are we getting auxiliary?
Center, 2 centers. Outers.
So we have powered all of them. So the last thing we're going to do today is put on the skid plate. So we're back on day 2, and this is actually why we recorded this and put it on YouTube, so you can learn from our mistakes instead of making them yourself. We could not get the skid plate on once the bumper was installed. We're terrible at reading instructions, and we actually didn't even pull out the instructions for the skid plate until we were done installing the bumper, but it actually does say that it needs to go on beforehand, because actually it needs to lower into the bumper as opposed to being lifted up from underneath.
Well, to be fair, most of these instructions suck anyway.
Yeah, we kind of just glance over them because we found a lot of them just aren't the most accurate. So we pulled it off. We're going to install the skid plate and then put it back on. The skid plate, as I mentioned, has to be lowered in, so you go over that lip, get our wires out of the way, and then these are actually the 2 sides that we couldn't get both them in from underneath. So that is the general location right there. All right, so the other 2 bolts, while we have it upside down, are going to go in through these holes and then into the frame. So actually, before we even get to it, all right, so let me show you something down here before we get the bumper back on. And that's something that we ran into yesterday, actually, while we were trying to put in the skid plate. So according to the instructions, there are some Jeeps where this hole right here is threaded. Mine is not. So the instructions say to use the OEM bolt to put it back on. My stock skid plate was actually attached to this part, which it's attached on the bottom. And we actually just took it out, but it's attached with 2 bolts this way. So we actually took it off because that's the only way for me to get access to the back here to put a nut on a non-OEM bolt. So that's what we did here, and then once we get the nut in here, I'll end up putting this back on just to keep the stock part, but I actually don't think, I think the only purpose that it serves is for my skid plate attachment to this nut down here. Now that it's all attached, we're good to put it back on the Jeep. So we've already recorded that once, so I'm just gonna go do it again. Bumper's back on, this time with the skid plate. Just gonna put on some finishing touches, got some D-ring shackles, and that'll be a wrap.
All right, and it is done.
Yeah, Not a bad install. We made one mistake that basically make it take twice as long, but nice looking bumper.
Now we're gonna need to add the winch.
Yep, coming in a video soon.
So what's left?
Gotta duck it. On to the next one.